It is now. So thank you for reminding me. So please turn your cameras off if you'd rather. But literacy at Cranfield is made up of these three areas, and they're doing them every day. So why do we think reading is so important? Why are we so passionate about it? It's because we know it's important. Research backs us up in our belief of its importance. And we know it opens up a world of learning for our children and imagination. We want our children to live life in all its fullness. Well, in order to be reading is a really big part of that. And studies show that reading a variety of literature by the age of 15 is the single biggest indicator of future success. Now, that's really powerful when we can say that outweighs things like the money in my life or where I live or the type of family makeup I have. Simply the variety of literature by the age of 15 will impact on our children's success. So let's promote reading and let's believe in it, and let's, as parents and schools, commit to it. In our school, reading is succeeding. Children do really well at the end of year 2, which is a national assessment point for children in their reading. And we do much better, certainly pre-pandemic, than others. And children get higher levels, far greater in our school than is seen nationally. And that's not just because of where they live or the makeup of our school, because it's a hugely diverse makeup, but it's because we offer consistent challenge, opportunities, experiences. We teach reading richly. We're told by people who observe and study our school that we know our pupils well and we match books carefully to their needs. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. Children do quickly learn to read fluently in our school. And year 4, our final year in school, achieve above the levels expected. Sorry, those year 4s who achieve above the levels expected for their age is really, really high. And that comes from these varied opportunities they have to read across the curriculum and through living in, being in a reading rich school. So that's great, isn't it? Cranfield's doing well with their reading, even post-pandemic, where we are seeing the impact of that missed time in school. Reading still stays the most strong in our school. But despite that success, just to add to the context for this evening, things aren't where we would want them to be nationally necessarily, and even in our own school. I cast no judgments here, but research tells us that parents stop reading with their children from the age of 7. And I think that's because they grow up, they become more independent. As parents, we might perceive them as no longer learning to read because they're not blending sounds and they're just getting on with it, perhaps. But we know that 10 minutes a day can make a real difference, even, of course, past that age of 7. And almost half of 7-year-olds are rarely or never read to at home. And that's really sad. And actually, they acknowledge that they just want to enjoy time with their parents. And that's all children need and want, really. Research tells us that if a child is going to thrive at school and even in work when they are older, an indicator, the biggest indicator for that, is whether or not they read for pleasure. I wonder if that's just a desire for joy, for imagination, for creativity, to have their world open, perhaps. But this is what research is telling us. And if children read outside of class, outside of school, they're 13 times, which is huge, more likely to read above the expected level for their age. Well, that makes sense. If a child swims outside of school, they're going to be a better swimmer. If they cycle every day, they're going to be a better cyclist, and so on. So we want to have a school where we read for pleasure and where reading doesn't stop at the school gate, but it continues at home. And hopefully this evening, you'll have ideas and motivations and have any questions answered to make sure that that happens. There is more research that says, well, children will be frequent readers if they rate themselves as really enjoying reading. That makes sense. I won't do it if I don't enjoy it. That they have a belief that it is important, and we can promote that as a school and you as parents. And having parents who are frequent readers. Now, that might be seeing parents read their own books, their own grown-up books, but also parents who read with them. This is a bar chart from research which shows as children get older, they read aloud less at home for reasons I've mentioned. And a re-emphasis again that actually the main reason children like or love to read with their grown-ups is because it's special time. And it really is. And I'm guilty of not being a parent who frequently reads in front of my children because I spend my days reading. But I certainly enjoy my reading time at story time at bedtime with my girls. So I think we need to commit, don't we, to that special time with our children. And why should we do it? Well, parents believe that by reading with their children, these are the things that it brings for our children. And this is all true. As a parent, I can reflect and think, right, my commitment to story time at bedtime, using a variety of books, all from the library. Very rarely do I buy a book for my children. Can they do these things? Can they relax? Yes. Can they learn from inspiring characters and real people? Yes. So just take a moment and have a look at those reasons to read. Now, you're not here to be persuaded to read with your child. You're here probably because you do read with your child. But thank you for enabling those things, those aspects that will help your children grow really, really well. So this evening is about our passion for reading and the fact that we make no apology for promoting and encouraging regular reading at home. Child A reads and discusses a book for 20 minutes each evening. And that equates to 10 entire days in school, additionally to the time they have in our school. Child B does 4 minutes and gets 2 days. Well, that's better than no days. And I would like to propose that we have a child between A and B who has 10 minutes a day. And the fact that that will still equate to 5 entire days in school, in addition to all of those wonderful things there. That's what we want for our children. So maybe we beg, we pray, go throw your TV set away, and in its place you can install a lovely bookshelf on the wall. Now, I don't think you should, because what will your furniture point at if you don't have a TV? But hopefully there's a nice context there that inspires us as parents to keep on reading with our children and have lots of fun with it. So I'm now going to start to talk to you about reading in school. What do we do at Cranfield to enable our children to become readers for life? We want them to enjoy literature in all its forms. We want your children to develop their fluency, their vocabulary, and my goodness, does reading a variety of books enable that? Their comprehension, their understanding of the stories they read and their books they read, and their ability to access all areas of the curriculum. Because if I can read, I can access all areas of the curriculum. And at Cranfield, we're determined that every child will learn to read, regardless of their background, their needs, their abilities, and so on. So how do we do that? Well, we implement it through guided reading, which is an approach where small groups work with their teacher on sharing a book of which we all have a copy at a slightly higher level than that which we can read independently. We can still access the book, but it's slightly trickier. But I've got an adult there holding me, supporting me through that slightly trickier reading process. Those sessions are focused and they have a focus within them. For example, inference or reading for expression. And the teacher will talk about what that means. They will model it and they will examine it as they go through the story with your children. That guided reading isn't always recorded, as in we don't always tell you we're doing it via the homeschool link in a way that we might if we hear them one-to-one, because it would be unsustainable and not necessarily impactful. But every class from year 1 to 4 and in reception pretty early on, we have guided reading sessions. Then, oh, I'm sorry, I don't know what I've pressed. Gosh, that was exciting. Then we have one-to-one reading, where we read on a one-on-one basis, and our teaching assistants support that, volunteers support that, but also teachers do. Children read in topic lessons. They're learning, they're researching, they're reading information with their teachers. In maths, they are reading. Our books are filled with reasoning opportunities whereby children have to read the maths problems and solve them and discuss them. And in reception and year 1 and at the start of year 2, we have daily phonics lessons. We will touch on phonics ever so slightly in this workshop, but it is not a phonics workshop, but phonics certainly is the foundation of reading. And we have daily spelling lessons in year 2, 3 and 4, whereby we are reading spellings, learning about spellings, learning about high frequency words. We have classrooms which are vocabulary rich. If our topic is rocks, relics and rumbles, our display is surrounded by vocabulary to do with that topic, words that we will learn about, think about and use. So reading is ultimately everywhere in our school. And your children learn to read via or through the Cranfield curriculum, which guides what we need to teach and what your children need to learn. And in our school, we have pathways. So if your children are in year 1 to 4, we use a system called Stepping Stones, which is our system for teaching and assessment. It tells us what your child can do and what they need to do next on a pathway that is suitable for them. So if they're very able, and they're in year 1, they might be on pathway 2 with time, which is on average a year 2 child's level. And we use those pathways to tell us what to teach and to tell us what the children need to learn. And these are in the back of your homeschool link, your child's homeschool link. And you can have a look at them. And if you're thinking, well, I'm not sure what pathway they're on, you can ask your child's teacher, and you could probably make a best guess by understanding what these different criteria are. I'll show you them a little bit more closely. We have them for reading, writing and maths and other areas as well. And these pathways are sequential, they grow, and there are some examples of stepping stones for reading. So in pathway 1, we want children, for example, to recognize and join in with predictable phrases. We're going on a bear hunt, we're going to catch a big one, is hopefully what children would say, because they join in and it's predictable and it's familiar to them. We want them to predict what might happen on the basis of what's been read so far. That's another reading skill that your child will develop. And we want them to make inferences. So Mr. P marched into the classroom. He had a frustrated look on his face. We can infer on the basis of what is being said and done as to how Mr. P might be feeling. So those pathways are in the back of your homeschool link, and I encourage you to look at them because they give you as parents ideas as to the kind of things we are after from your children. We have a reading scheme in school. It's the Oxford Reading Tree scheme. In the earliest stages of learning to read, it marries alongside the phonics teaching. And that means that children are not accessing books that are inaccessible. And that's a good thing. We don't throw children on a bike without stabilizers and throw them down a hill. We support them, we structure them, and we make sure that we're giving them the right resources at the right time. And this reading scheme has some core books that are the foundation of each stage of reading. But also we want reading to be rich. We want there to be more to life than Biff, Chip and Kipper. So hopefully you're familiar with other parts of those stages, traditional tales, songbirds, Snapdragon's books and non-fiction books like these. We want the children to love reading. We don't want it to be a chore. We want them to have a joy for books. And our variety supports that, hopefully. And hopefully you're pleased with the quality of the books that are coming home. They cost us a lot of money, and we continue to build on that set and grow it as best as we can. And then as children grow older, year 3, 4 age generally, that richness of that reading scheme develops further. We have fiction books, chucklers, which are funny books, myths and legends, non-fiction, classics, but written to be age appropriate. Sometimes children who are fluent readers can access books that are not necessarily appropriate for their maturity. They may be able to read it, but it doesn't make it necessarily right for them to read it. So these books are really, really supportive as your children grow older. So that's our reading scheme. We're going to start to move into your impact and time with your child now, and think about the types of reading that there are. In our school, we like to think that there are 3 levels of reading fluency, and children should experience reading at the last 2, instructional and independent, but they should never read at frustration level. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what they mean, what those different areas mean. Frustration is where a child is experiencing difficulty after the initial stages of learning to read. So once they've got past the sounding out and blending every single word, which will happen at the start, where we're saying the cat sat, full stop. Once we're past that, we don't want them to read at frustration, which is 10 words in 100. They're experiencing difficulty with 10 words in 100. And that might not sound like a lot, but research tells us that if we're struggling with 10 words in 100, our understanding of what we're reading actually halves. Well, if we're understanding only of half of what we read, we're not going to enjoy reading. So 10 words in 100 might not sound like a lot, but we don't want children to be struggling that much. We want them to be reading at an instructional and an independent level. Instructional is they're struggling with 5 words in 100. So when you're reading at home with your child, if there is the odd hesitation, the odd thinking moment, the odd sounding out, that's really good. And you're there to support, or you're there to help with that big, tricky word. And we'll talk about that shortly as well. But if your reading time with your child is agony and painful, and you can't wait for them to turn that page and are wondering if it will ever come, I really encourage you to talk with your child's teacher, because I would suggest to you that they're at frustration. They might not be exhibiting frustration because they think this is normal, but that's not joyful. That's not wonderful. We want to enjoy reading, and therefore we should be coping with the vast majority of the words in front of us. And that means we can comprehend, understand, and it means we can enjoy what we're reading. So a real encouragement there. 2 sides to this. One, if they're struggling on every single word and it's painful, talk to your teacher. We're partners in your child's reading. When I was in the classroom, I was passionate that I'm not going to take offense to a parent saying, I think they're ready to move to the next stage, or I'm a bit concerned about this, because I have 30 children and you may have 1, 2, or 3. So let's be partners and work together. So frustration, talk to your teacher. But similarly, if your child is reading largely fluently, try not to think this is too easy, because I feel like they should be agonizing over words or struggling because therefore they're learning. Actually, by simply reading fluently, your child is learning because they're comprehending. And then they will move up stages progressively in our school. We formally assess that every half term to make sure children are at the right stage. Sometimes still you may feel the books are too easy. And in that case, again, talk to the teacher and they will help you. And you may very well be right. So partner with us, but feel comfortable if your child is simply reading. That's a really good thing. So what are the elements of reading? We make sure that there are 2 dimensions in our teaching of reading. First of all, word reading, and that's made up of 2 things. First of all, learning to be speedy in pronouncing, saying, reading unfamiliar words. I've never seen it before, but my phonics and or my experience as a reader enables me to work out what it says. And then to simply recognize it. Everybody here, hopefully, probably knows that that says study. You just knew it. That's because you've learned to speedily recognize a familiar printed word. And we teach word reading through phonics and also through simply recognizing printed words. Comprehension is the second dimension. We want to understand the text, and we develop that through quality discussions and with guidance from those stepping stones that you saw earlier. Inference, prediction, expression. You need to understand a story, don't you, to express it appropriately. And how do we do that? So let's look at word reading first. We have phonics in year 1. We have phonics in early years. We teach them the sounds and the letter names. And we do it because they learn that letters have names and they have sounds. And that those sounds come together to enable us to read words. Cat, cat. And then we learn how to break up the words so that we can spell cat. And also we form letters. And we begin to decode sentences and text. We begin to read. When I send this PowerPoint out, if you want to click there, you can find out about phonics and you can hear the sounds that we use in school for each letter. And then there are also tricky words to learn to read. And they're tricky, and this is our school website, and there's a huge amount on our literacy page, but how can I support my child's reading? I'm going to show you some resources here. But there are a huge amount of tricky words, and they're tricky because they're not necessarily phonetic. That means that the sounds don't necessarily always create the word that we have to learn to say. Said is an example of a word that is not phonetic. Said phonetically would be spelt S-E-D. That says said or said, depending on where you're at in your phonics. So we need to learn these words by sight. We need to know that that says the. It's as simple as that. We need to learn it. We need to recognize it. And these words are in the back of your child's homeschool link. And I encourage you to look at them regularly or to tear them out and put them on the fridge and to look at them randomly. That, her, so, not, be, so that we simply learn them. They're tricky, but also they're high frequency. They turn up an awful lot in our writing. The is in probably your child's reading book tonight. So if I know that that says the and not te, as phonics might tell us it says, I'm going to be a better reader. So I encourage you to read these words regularly. You could point at them with your child and simply say them for them. You could do a column at a time over a week each. You could have them on the fridge and they can't have the snack until they've read the top 5. That would be a tad torturous, wouldn't it? But not a bad idea. And so on. And in year 1, and this is something we're going to adopt across the school because we're seeing the success of it. I know that many of your children have a laminated bookmark with a set of words which has come from here mainly. of a similar nature. They're tricky and we just need to learn them. So before you read, every time, go through those words. Don't agonize, 30 seconds, boom, 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 boom. If they can't recognize the word, tell them that says to and move on. The next day, can they remember it? And also do them in a different order so that they don't simply learn a rhythm as opposed to the actual words. So those words are very, very useful, and they allow us to teach children to learn to read words by sight. It will really help their fluency if you learn them. So now comprehension. Comprehension is a key part of reading. If we don't understand what we're reading, we're not going to carry on reading, are we? So we've got some supportive documents that I'm going to share with you now, and they show the stepping stones, as you can see on the screen. And they also give ideas of how you may develop your child's comprehension based on those key stepping stones. They're not all of them, but similarly, they don't need to be because your children come to school for a reason. But they might give you some ideas. So this stepping stone says, I can talk about titles and events and their importance. And there's some ideas here. What's the title of the book? Well, I wonder if you ask your child that, or whether you just storm into reading with them. What do you think the book's going to be about? Do you think it will be a fiction book or a non-fiction book? And why do you think that? Fiction is story, non-fiction is information. Why are titles important? That's a good question, isn't it? So even before I've opened the book, I've got 4 ideas there as to how I might enable my child to understand titles and their importance. This one says inferences. I can make inferences based on what is being said and done. So what do you think the character's thinking? How do you think they're feeling? What did the character say to make you think that? These are questions you can ask your child. But I want to be really clear, going back to one of my first points, and say, you can't sit down with your child this evening and ask them 35 questions. They're going to get very annoyed by you very quickly, and you're going to spoil the story, aren't you? But what we can do is ask 1 or 2 each night when we read with them. We're going to take an interest. Some of these will feel like common sense, but if not, they're there for you to give you ideas. Another great one is linking what they've read or heard to their own experiences. So have they ever read a story like that? Have you ever been caught in a rainstorm? Have you ever seen lightning that we're learning about in this book? These are all questions that bring a joy to reading. So let me send you via the chat window some links to these pathway documents, and I hope they're of use. So this one is pathway 1, which is in sync with our year 1 reading curriculum. Pathway 2 is in sync with our year 2 curriculum. And if your child is an able reader, I would be looking in year 1, I would be looking at that. And pathway 3 is here. And that's for children who, on average, are working within year 3 and 4 reading. It gives you ideas about what those stepping stones really mean. I hope they're of help. So now what we're going to do is we're going to think about developing comprehension further. And I want to share with you a resource we use in school. So hopefully on the screen, you can see a website called oxfordowl.co.uk. And when you get to the homepage, this is a free website that we've signed up for. You can log in. And the username, I'll share this in a little bit again, is Cranfield with a capital C. And the password is Crane, C-R-A-N-E, with no capitals. It's not an advanced password because there is nothing advanced to this website for us to be worried about. And it's something we want the children to be able to access independently. You can have this on your tablet if you have one, and you can set it on your home page. And like us all, we can remember the passwords, and it is iPad friendly. When this comes up, don't panic. I've spoken to Oxford Owl about this. There is no data on Oxford Owl to have been breached. Parents have said to me, we're getting this and we're worried. Well, there's no data on here to be breached. So I'm not worried by that at all. The only data is that Biff, Chip and Kipper have been to the park. So when you go into this website, there's various things you can look at. But Oxford Owl ebook library is fantastic because the books your children have in school, many of them are on the website. So if you know your child is on stage 4, level 4, it's on the back of their books if you're not sure. You can click on that, and there are all the stories that they can choose. You might want this because you want to encourage your child to read and they are reluctant with a paper book, and somehow by sticking it on a screen, they're helped and more motivated. That doesn't harm them, in my opinion. It might be because you want to shove it in front of them whilst you cook the dinner, and you can know that they can be helped to read.
The scarf.
Because it will talk to them, and because there are activities that they can play. So I'm showing you this as a resource, but also to demonstrate how very simple stories can be rich in our reading discussions. And to point out this, many parents and teachers forget about this page, and it is very useful. You don't need to read it in advance. You can open the book and glance at it. But before reading, look at the cover, read the title. We just said about reading the title. What time of year is it? Probably autumn, possibly winter. Oh, there's some snow there. Well, when will we see snow? And there are some ideas. You don't have to do them, but it does often give you ideas that just support your support of your child. And this is a key part that I really do encourage you to use, and that I use with my daughter. Let's have a go at reading these words. They're going to be in the book. So let's read them now. We might sound them out at first, or we might simply know them. But there's an unusual word with a funny little punctuation mark. Let's make sure we know it says it's, so that when we see it shortly, we're fluent, we're not at frustration. And then let's acknowledge together that there's some really tricky words here, and we could try and read them, or we could simply be told what they say. Liked, made, came, make, dangerous. And let's as parents be ready to not allow frustration and to read them to our child if necessary, because we're at instructional. We're not expecting them to know everything. So do look at that page. So let's start to read this story. Anina liked knitting. She made a scarf. Anina's mum helped her. The scarf was long and warm. It's a good scarf, said Anina. Now I'm yet to ask my child any questions because I don't need to interrupt them. Let's just get into the story. Biff and Chip came to play. It was a cold day. I might now ask them, how do we know it's cold? There's snow. Okay, how else do we know it's cold? They're wearing lots of layers and boots, aren't they? And now we get back into the story again. Anina put on her scarf. What a cold day, she said. Now, there's some expression there, isn't there? And I wonder why there's an exclamation mark. It's because she's exclaiming it. So maybe we need to reread that and be more expressive. Biff looked at Anina's scarf. What a long scarf, she said. I made it, said Anina. I couldn't stop knitting. The children went to the park. They went to the pond. Now, we're going to have a look at this picture. I think we could predict now what's going on over here. Why do they look angry? Or do they look angry? I think they do. What do you think is going to happen next? Are they angry because it's snowy and their feet are stuck in the snow? Or do they look a bit unkind? I'm not sure, but nevertheless, I've discussed it with my child. Now, just before we go on, a parent's asked, is frustration when they are still sounding out or when they struggle to sound out? There is a balance in this, and I think it has to be what's right. And I'm always happy, as our teachers, to help further advise on that or to hear a child read. There is no exact science, but my point is this, is if a child has moved past learning phonics, they've learned all their sounds, and that takes time, and phonics goes to the end of year 1, and reading with them is agony. Every single word is sounded out or simply not understood. And it's taking so long that the thought of even asking them a question as a parent is painful because you feel like you're never going to get through this. I think that's frustration because I can't see joy in that. So it might be that we need to go back a little bit and be more fluent at the stage we're at, and then move up when we're ready. So I would have to hear that child read myself and make a judgment. But I think that general concept of, if this is painful, and remember that if we are frustrated, we're not comprehending, if they can't answer any questions about what they have read, either through sounding out or not, then something's the matter anyway. We as the adults around them need to review that. But it's okay for a child to go to read this and go, the children went to the park. They went to the pond, because they're understanding that and they're learning to read. And just before we go on, and I hope I've somewhat answered that question, but if that parent wants to speak to me afterwards, we absolutely can. Let's just think about what a child needs to do to read that very simple sentence. They have to know that these funny squiggles are letters. Why is that an E? Why is that an E? Because we've taught them it is. But it's ultimately a funny squiggle. Then they've got to know that they come together to make words. Sometimes, like went, I can use my sounds. Went. But sometimes the, it's not phonetic. So I've got to compute all of that. Then I've got to bring them together into sentences which mean something, and I've got to understand that meaning. I've also got to have a worldwide experience to know what a park is, and to know what snow is, and to know why the ducks are magically walking on water here. So there's a huge amount that goes on to read a very simple sentence. So I've just predicted now what's going to happen next. Well, I know you're not going to forgive me if I don't turn the page, but goodness gracious me, look at these children. They're not being very Cranfield, are they? Some children ran up. They pulled Anina's scarf. Well, how is Anina feeling? I can only infer. Doesn't tell me how she's feeling. I have to use my experience, my understanding to suggest she's frustrated, maybe scared. How's mum feeling? Look, she's going storming in. Here she comes. So, and now I can express, and so on and so on. So there's a huge amount we can do, A, with Oxford Owl, B, with the reading books we've got, and remembering that first page of advice, and, oh, look, dear, gosh, it's all going on. That last page after reading, there's advice there. Turn to page 24 and ask, why did the boy go in the ambulance? So if your child can answer one question, isn't that wonderful that we've moved forwards? And again, whilst we're busy cooking the dinner, we can play activity 1, And these questions will reinforce the stepping stones, the reading skills I've told you about. What colours did Anina use for her scarf? Well, there's a slight clue in the picture, but I still have to read the question. I still have to understand it. I still have to know my colours. Why did Anina's mum tell the boy to get off the ice? Well, we didn't read that bit, but as adults, we're probably going to guess that it was because the ice was not safe, and so on. So they can tick these answers and go through them and tell you how well they did. They can play another activity, which will be of a sort of different aspect of the book. So I need to sort out my hot day clothes. So that's just a little bit of fun. What am I missing? Because it's not happy. All my shorts as well. There we go. And I can move on. Doesn't seem to like that, but you get the idea. There we go. Look, I've worked it out. Mr. P is struggling to do this. That says a lot, doesn't it? But some activities there. So I really encourage you to have a look at Oxford Owl. There's much more to Oxford Owl than I've shown you, but I hope that's of some use. Another resource which I'm going to share with you now is this one. I'm going to share it with you via the chat box. And I've acknowledged with you, we are not here to teach our children's reading at 7 o'clock at night after a busy day. They've been in school, they've been learning, we've been at work or at home, keep in our busy lives. And that the stepping stones documents I've sent you previously might be too much for you. Well, this is a really great resource, and we give this to volunteer helpers who kindly hear readers, and even our teachers have this up in their classrooms and so on. So red questions are questions only one that I'll read before they begin to read the book. An orange question I can ask during the book. And finally, green questions I can ask at the end. So what's the title of this book? The Scarf. What do you think it's going to be about? Well, probably a scarf, Dad, is what my child would say. And then during the book, I can say, what do you think is going to happen now? He's fallen in the icy water. What do you think is going to happen? And then at the end of the story, I might say, how did Anina feel when the boy pulled the scarf? So I hope you like that. That is a useful resource, and it might help you enrich your child's reading time. Just having a look at the chat window, and parents are commenting, which is really appreciated. One of the parents prefers to read in the morning. Now that's what happens in the P household as well in terms of school books. I don't know that it happens because Mr. P rushes out the door, but I know that in our house it's read whilst my daughter's inhaling her Weetabix. That's because it works for us. I'm saying the evening out of habit, if I'm honest with you. You do what works for you. My daughter, when I've tried to school read with her school reading book at bedtime, she's lying in bed, it doesn't work. She seems to get frustrated and she's tired. And then she's not reading as well as I know she can. And therefore I try and stop it and say, come on, darling, we'll leave it now. And she then gets frustrated because she wants to, and so on. So in our house, the morning works better. You do what works for your child. No, there's no science behind it at all. I think if we here tonight are all trying our best, that's all we can do, isn't it? And then another parent has asked for the Oxford Owl login. That's going to come up in a moment, but also I'll send it in Friday's Crane mail. Is there a wall to get through with your child's reading to get to the point of talking about how the children feel about what's going to happen next or how the character's feeling? I would suggest there is. I think that's a good, fair point to make. And I think the wall is this: once they're past that early phonics development, where some of our dandelion readers, they're called, are so basic because they're only based on the sounds that have been taught. So if you've only learned 6 phonics sounds, S, A, S, A, T, I, sat pin. There's only so many ways we can manipulate those letters to make words. It sat. It sat on the pin. Ow. You know, I can't go much further, can I? And what your child at that point needs to be doing is blending those sounds. It, sat. At that point, that's all we need to be doing, because that's going to open up the future of reading, where we are reading more fluently and so on. If, as I'm answering those questions, if the parent who said, you know, is there a wall that you get past? You think, I'm not sure you fully answered that. Stay on at the end and we can talk. But let's think about other things. Is there a wall to get past for my daughter to ride her bike without her stabilizers? Yes. Now, I've taken the stabilizers off. We've done all that we can. I'm holding her jacket. I'm letting go of the seat. I'm running alongside. But when I let go, her wall is to simply stop pedaling. Now, I know one day she will carry on pedaling. I cannot teach her to ride a bike now because she can do it, but she has to pedal, doesn't she? So there's a wall there. Is there a wall in swimming? Is there a wall in learning how to do the column division method? Yes. So I think we have to get past those walls. But if there's any worry or frustrations for any parents here tonight, or questions, or then just stay on at the end and let's talk about it. So I hope this traffic light system's nice. Our volunteers like that, and I like that. And then a little reminder for you to communicate. Here's an example of a parent saying they've read well. You can see here, we're so lucky in our school. My daughter doesn't come to this school, but I'm telling you, we're lucky. You know, we'll change the books as often as you wish. That does not mean you have to read a book a night, particularly when they get more lengthy. I worry if children are doing that amount of reading, if I'm honest, because they need to rest as well and play and everything else. But if they're absorbing, digesting, enjoying a book a night, we will change them, because that's great, because practice makes perfect. And I have taken this idea from my daughter's school in their version of a reading record, and it's a cue for you. And we've talked about all of these things tonight: using sounds, reading fluently. Are they reading most of it well? Answering questions. Have I asked them a question? And have they used expression? It's okay if you're not ticking all 4 of these here, for example. That's okay. They're not going to do all of this all the time. Expression is a skill to develop that comes through comprehension. I can only express appropriately if I understand what it is I'm reading. So use that homeschool link. Ask questions, make comments. We do read these. They do help us know and understand your child as a reader. And then what can we read? The answer is anything. I'm not bothered what your child reads, but I am bothered that they do read and that they love reading. You might not want to read them to read your work emails, but they could certainly get an email from Nanny, couldn't they? Or Uncle Tom, and they could write one back, and they could love poetry and jokes, because there's so much out there to read. So let them read what they're interested in, and allow that, because reading must be a pleasure. If it isn't a pleasure, it's a chore, and nobody really wants to do chores. There's the Oxford Owl class login again. Putting Cranfield there, Crane there, and Jobs are good. Use that, as well as those keywords, those frequency words in the back of your homeschool link. So this evening, I've given you a bit of a context of reading in our school and the fact that it's so important and that research tells us that. I've told you how we teach reading in our school. I've certainly dipped into it. And then we've looked at some ways of engaging with your child's reading, and that I hope will be of help. But ultimately, the biggest thing that you can do is enjoy reading with your child. We are busy people with busy lives, and there's only so much we can do. And I think if as a minimum, you read a story with your child at bedtime and you have a laugh, or you have a question, or you have some quality time, then I think you're doing a wonderful job. So here are 6 top tips to finish on. Just make 10 minutes a day. How many minutes are there in a day? I know we can spare 10. And that's 70 minutes a week. Well, if I did 70 minutes of press-ups a week, my goodness, A, I would look different, and B, I would be really good at it, wouldn't I? So 70 minutes a week is great to do with your child. Try and choose loads of different types of books. Old books, new books, lift the flap books. One of my favorite things I love when I read books with my children in school is when the book turns. I don't know why I love that, but some books turn. And just having those variety of experiences with your children. Have books from your childhood that you loved reading and read it to them and with them. Take turns to read. You can read their reading book that they bring home from school as much as they can. So do a page each, perhaps. Help them with those bigger words that you saw at the start of the book. Oh, dangerous is going to come up. I'll read that for you when it comes up, if you can't remember that it says dangerous. So have a think about having variety and letting them, you do some of the hard work. I'll read this page for you. And you can also model, can't you? Talk about the book. We've talked about that lots, haven't we? And hopefully the resources will help you do that. And I'll just go back and say, talk about the book within reason. Your child does not need you to be a teacher. My daughter does not need me to be a teacher. She just wants to have some special time. Pay attention to the language. There are so many fabulous words in books, and not only the books they read from school, but in books from the library and so on. Don't assume they understand those words. Ask them, comment on them. He grimaced, he grinned. Well, what does that mean? Do you know what a grin is? He whispered. What does that mean? So talk about that wonderful vocabulary. You will have seen on social media and things where a child who's been read to every day up to the age of 4 has this many millions of words versus this child who hasn't been read to and has a far, far, far less amount of words. So enjoy that vocabulary with your children. I haven't mentioned Bedford libraries, but if you can get to the library, if you've got time, and even on a weekend, it costs no money to go there. Your child can easily spend an hour there. And often they have activities as well, like colouring in and Lego, or sometimes they have people in reading stories. I cannot praise our Bedford libraries enough for what they offer. And in my family, I'm very lucky that Mrs. P can take the girls and they come home with 10 books each. And I don't buy books for our children because I don't need to, because it gives us greater variety. And the books that are there are such high quality. They're not old and tatty. Often I think they're brand new and we're the first people to open them. So I really encourage you to use the library. And if nothing else, it is an hour out on the weekend, which is not a bad thing, is it? And the language that has come from that variety of books and that 10 books coming in and out of our house every week, it is immense. So I really do encourage a visit to the library. And then, if I haven't said it already, my final tip is to enjoy it. We have busy lives. Yes, it will impact on them educationally, but the main thing is that we have time together and we enjoy and we love books, and we have special times together. I read a book from the library the other day to my daughter called The Perfectly Perfect Wish. And she said, I made a wish when I blew out my candle. I said, oh, fantastic. Don't tell Daddy what the wish is, because you mustn't share your wish. And she said, I wish that I had a perfect birthday. And I said, did you have a perfect birthday? And she said, yes. Now, isn't that a wonderful thing? That's just a wonderful moment that I was able to have with my daughter. I don't know if it'll help her educationally, but we had a special time together and I enjoyed hearing her view that her birthday was perfect. I'm not sure if an hour in gravity on the trampolines was perfect for me, but it was perfect for her. So there you go. But that's the 6 top tips. And in thinking about libraries, what's my favorite Bedford library? Well, I don't get to go to them because Mr. P's at work, but I have been to a couple with them on the weekends, and Bromham Library is lovely. You have to check their opening times. Some of them have where you can have a membership card where you let yourself in and the library's effectively closed, but you can go in. The best time is when it's because you can check your own books out. But I think an open library with a librarian, there's something special about that. I went to Bromham Library, I think, during the summer holiday with my daughters, and I found the librarian there incredible. She knew all the children coming in. We don't live in Bromham, but she knew all the children, and her engagement was fantastic. The selection of books was amazing. So I know that Mrs. P likes Bromham. Wootton Library she goes to. She sometimes, if she's in Bedford Town, that's a bigger library, will go there. And they the other day had somebody doing rhyme time or something along those lines that my youngest daughter enjoyed. So they're the ones she mentions to me most. Wootton, Bromham, Bedford Town. I believe there's one in Kempston. But do check the opening times because they're very limited, sadly. So I hope that's given you some motivation to read with your children. I know you do because you're here and therefore you're interested. I hope it's been of some help. If you've got any questions, there's 2 ways we can do it. 1, you can stay behind and we'll talk privately. 2, you can ask me at any other time. Or 3, you can ask me via the chat window. So just whilst you think about that, we'll just finish and I'll remind you of something that Dr. Zeus has taught us and that we encourage in our school. The more that you read, the more things you will know. The more that you learn, the more places you'll go. And that's true, isn't it? And in our digital world, we must make sure that children still know the joy of holding a book, turning its pages, and going into another world through that. If after this workshop you're thinking, my goodness, I'd like to volunteer 3 days a week to support reading at Cranfield, or even an hour, then please, you're very welcome to speak with me. And if you've got any questions, speak to me, you're very welcome, or your child's class teacher. And remember that there's only so much you can do as parents. So any help, any time you give to your child is appreciated. So I hope that helps. Has anybody got any questions? Fab. Well, I wish you a wonderful evening. Thank you for everything you're doing for your children. I hope they've had a good first half term in their year groups. And don't hesitate to talk to us if you've got questions or concerns. Thanks, everybody.